The thing about emergency diplomatic replacements is that they're never the first choice or the second. In my case, I was number 104, right behind the embassy janitor and a broken vending machine that only dispensed mood-enhancing gum. I was a linguistics officer. My job was to teach swear words to translation AIs and occasionally explain why calling a Zalvioran elder squid face might trigger an interplanetary incident. I wasn't supposed to wear a suit. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the royal courts of Zalvior Prime, and I definitely wasn't supposed to make eye contact with the princess of the Alarian Dominion. Too bad nobody told my luck that. They said the original ambassador got food poisoning from a glowing cocktail. I had my suspicions. I mean, who voluntarily orders something called the nebula vomit? Regardless, that's how I found myself standing in the arrival spire, wearing an ill-fitting tux that had been 3D printed an hour earlier. It kept trying to recite Shakespearean greetings in French. The AI tailoring matrix was still drunk. Salvior Prime didn't look like a planet. It looked like a chandelier made love to a jellyfish. Everything shimmered. Buildings floated. The air smelled like electricity and warm sugar, which is the closest my Earth nose could interpret plasma orchids. And the citizens, well, most of them looked humanoid, in the way that mannequins are technically human-shaped, but slightly unsettling, except the princess. Princess Eris Valsarathi did not shimmer. She radiated, tall, composed, clad in robes that flowed like they had their own weather systems. Her skin had the pale gleam of moonstone, and her hair, black with streaks of dark violet, was tied in a braid so precise I suspected time manipulation. But it was her ears that caught me. Long, pointed, elegant. Not in an elf cosplay kind of way. More like radar dishes for emotion, which according to the briefing I skimmed while panicking in the restroom, was not far from the truth. When I was introduced, I bowed, or I meant to. What I actually did was trip over my own foot and almost faceplant into what I hope was an ornamental jellyfish tank. Jonathan Heller, the translator AI, chirped behind me. Representative of Earth, professional communicator, accident-prone. There was a silence, the kind that stretches across dimensions. I like his ears, Eris said, deadpan. They're very inefficient. She turned and walked away. Did I just get insulted or complimented? I whispered to the ambassador aide, a floating cube named Dree who blinked in binary. Statistically? Both. I wasn't invited to the opening banquet. Probably for the best. I hear the appetizers had legs and opinions. Instead, I was shown to my quarters, which looked like a meditation chamber designed by someone who'd never been sad. No corners. Everything glowed. The bed levitated and hummed affirmations in an alien tongue. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the way she looked at me, like I was an alien, which, fair, but not entirely in a bad way. Curious, slightly amused, mildly horrified. The next morning, I was summoned to join a diplomatic tour of the Star Garden. It was a floating botanical preserve suspended above the planet by gravitational ribbons. Picture a zero-gravity greenhouse curated by gods on acid. Flowers made of light, vines that whispered compliments, trees that played ambient jazz. I was warned not to touch anything unless I wanted to spontaneously relive my worst memory. Tempting. I kept my hands to myself. Eris was already there, speaking with a group of envoys. I tried to blend into the background, which is hard to do when you're the only one wearing a tux that occasionally quotes Much Ado About Nothing. She noticed, of course she did. You again, she said, walking over. Me again, I replied, bracing for round two. She studied me. You emit chaotic energy, like a star that forgot how to explode. Thanks, I said. I try. We walked through the garden together, though I suspect she only tolerated me because I asked questions no one else bothered to ask. Like, do those flowers really whisper? Or am I hallucinating from jet lag? Or what happens if I try to high-five that levitating fern? Answer, existential dread. Avoid the fern. Then it happened. We stopped before a glowing pond of liquid stardust, and for a moment she stood still, backlit by bioluminescent vines. She looked so impossibly alien and impossibly real. Not in a romantic way, just in a My brain wasn't built to process this much beauty without rebooting kind of way. And, like the idiot I am, I opened my mouth. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I whispered. Immediate silence. Even the jazz trees paused. Her posture didn't change, but her ears twitched once. Then again. Then slowly, without a word, she turned her back to me. I stood there regretting everything I'd ever done, including birth. The guide, a phosphorescent squid named Trill, floated beside me. "Well," he said, "that's either a declaration of mating or a violation of 3 treaties. Possibly both." I didn't move. "She didn't explode," I said. "Not externally," Trill replied. "Good sign." Back in my quarters, I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. Maybe she hadn't heard me. Maybe the translator glitched. Maybe I could just hide under the anti-grav bed until the end of time. But the next morning, I found out the phrase had already been uploaded to the Galactic feed, translated, memed, and dissected. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," played on repeat across 50 systems, accompanied by various interpretations, some romantic, some diplomatic, and one conspiracy theory that declared I was the prophesied human to seduce the princess and usher in a new golden age of planetary alliances. I was famous, or infamous. It's a fine line. Eris didn't say a word to me for 2 days. Not that I expected her to. I figured I'd get reassigned, banished, possibly vaporized. But on the 3rd day, she sent a message. 3 words. "You still mean it?" I stared at the screen, then typed back, "Yes, but I also think the fern hates me." Her reply was immediate. "It does, but I don't." The diplomatic department called it a minor incident, which in galactic political terms is somewhere between oops and prepare for war. Apparently telling an Alarian princess she was beautiful violated 3 codes of etiquette, 2 psychological safety protocols, and at least 1 sacred poem that stated flattery should only be administered during lunar conjunctions and never before brunch. The Earth delegation was not pleased. "You told her what?" Ambassador Krell shouted, pacing his office while holograms of confused Zalviorans flickered on a dozen screens behind him. "I complimented her," I said, trying to sound casual while holding an ice pack to my forehead. I'd tried to duck when the ambassador threw a stylus. I had failed. "That wasn't a compliment," Krell snapped. "That was an emotional projectile. We're supposed to be neutral. Neutral, Heller, not romantically spontaneous." "She didn't vaporize me," I offered. "Yet." Meanwhile, the Zalvioran news feeds had gone full soap opera. "Human invader sparks emotional revolution," one headline read. "Princess hears compliment, time stands still," claimed another. Someone had edited my face onto a swooning poet holding a bouquet of screaming flowers. I was a meme. Worse, I was a diplomatic meme. The only one enjoying any of this was Ziri, Eris's aide. She found me in the Hall of Emotional Calibration, where I was being re-educated by a holographic therapist who looked like a giraffe made of lava. I'd been told to detox my intentions and apologize to the nearest fungus. "Having fun?" she asked, leaning against the empathy scanner console. "Not particularly," I replied. The scanner flashed mild dishonesty. She grinned. "You know, most humans either fear the princess or fantasize about her. You confused her." "I didn't mean to." "Exactly, that's the problem." She handed me a small glowing cube. "She wants to see you." I stared at it. "See me like, see me? Or see me so she can quietly erase me from history?" She didn't say, but she did twitch her ears while asking. That's basically a handwritten invitation. The room she chose was not a throne chamber or war hall, but something resembling a greenhouse suspended over a lake of molten moonlight. Bioluminescent vines hung from the ceiling. The floor was made of translucent crystal. And right in the center sat Eris, cross-legged, eyes closed, surrounded by floating symbols that shimmered with thought energy. "I expected a dungeon," I said as I stepped in. "This is considerably nicer." "Sit," she said, eyes still shut. I sat. She opened one eye. "Do you always say things like that? About people?" "Only when I mean them," I replied. "Also sometimes when I'm nervous, which is most of the time." She regarded me in silence. Then, "Do you know how long it's been since someone saw me without seeing the crown?" "A while." "Try never. Her voice was calm, but her ears betrayed the tension. They see the dynasty, the obligation, the legend. Not me. Well, I said, I don't know about your dynasty, but I've seen your karaoke playlist. That was very humanizing. Her ears froze. You hacked my private archive? I tripped and fell into it, I said, digitally. I should report you, but then I wouldn't get to ask you about that one song called Starfields and Sappy Things. Was that you? She blushed. Actually blushed. Her skin flickered like the sky right before a comet storm. I was experimenting with Terran's sentiment, she muttered. It was beautiful, I said. Like you. She stood so quickly the vines recoiled. You're doing it again. I know. Why? Because I mean it, and because I'm an idiot, but mostly the first one. Silence again. Then she walked to the edge of the crystal floor and stared down into the molten lake. I followed, but stopped just short of standing beside her. The council thinks I'm compromised, she said, that I've grown too curious, too attached. I'm supposed to remain above sentiment. I've been accused of the opposite, too sentimental, too curious. Once I cried during a cereal commercial. It was a really good commercial. You're ridiculous. I try. Another silence. Then very quietly she asked, what would you do if someone told you that you weren't supposed to feel something? I'd probably feel it anyway, I said, and then try to name it, and then overanalyze it until I ruined it. She smiled, actually smiled. I wasn't sure if it was a trap, but her ears relaxed, her posture shifted. I want to show you something, she said. The symbols floating around her head began to spiral. A dome of energy surrounded us, humming with low harmonic tones. Suddenly, images began to flicker in the air. Memories, I realized. Her memories. I saw her as a child, running through crystalline fields. Her father's voice, distant and stern, training in silence. Tears she never let fall, her hand brushing against a stranger's once, in the way she recoiled like it burned. I saw loneliness, poised, beautiful, sterile. And then, oddly, I saw me, my awkward introduction, my flailing bow, my banana suit misunderstanding, her curiosity, her laughter, silent but real. The dome faded. She looked at me. That's why I turned away. You didn't want me to see that. I didn't want me to see that. You're allowed to feel things, Eris, even inconvenient things, especially those. She nodded slowly. You're unlike any diplomat I've ever met. I get that a lot. Most of them don't try to high-five the vines. In my defense, they started it. Her smile widened just a little more, then fell into something softer. I don't know what this is between us. I don't either. But it's real, she said. I'd bet a moon on it. She stepped closer, studying my face like she was trying to memorize the shape of my absurdity. Her hand hovered for a moment, then gently, carefully, brushed my temple. Then we're both compromised, she whispered. Emotionally treasonous, I agreed. Possibly infectious. I've been told I grow on people, like a rash. I need to speak to the council. I'll just be here, I said, trying not to offend any more sacred poems. As she turned to leave, I caught a final flicker of her ears. 3 twitches, rapid. Ziri had said that meant surprise, or excitement, or possibly indigestion. Either way, I was definitely in trouble. The good kind. Maybe. The first indication that something had gone wrong with the memory-sharing ritual was the way the ceiling started dripping with scenes from my 4th grade talent show. I had tried to perform a solo recorder version of Flight of the Bumblebee. There were bees, there was flight, there was also weeping. None of it was symbolic. Eris looked horrified, not at the ritual, but at the revelation that I once wore a cape made of tinfoil and called myself Sir Buzzington. This wasn't supposed to be this immersive, she said, swiping at a hovering memory bubble that showed me tripping over a stack of dictionaries while trying to impress a librarian in college. I think the neural stabilizer's overheating, I replied, or mocking me. It's hard to tell with these models. Your brain is leaking into mine. Well, good news, that means I'm not alone in this embarrassment anymore. We had initiated the memory merge in a chamber called the Auric Atrium, a high-tech dome of empathic interface crystals and quantum thought synchronizers. Basically, a therapy session with 1,000 surveillance drones and zero emotional boundaries. The goal was symbolic unity, a respectful glimpse into each other's most formative moments. Instead, our minds became a two-way fire hose of unresolved trauma and musical nostalgia. She saw my childhood, my awkward teenage years, my therapist explaining that humor was not a coping mechanism, but a form of rebellion against vulnerability. I saw her first heartbreak, which took place entirely in silence, her back to a palace mirror, her tears refusing to fall in case they were seen. We both winced when we reached the karaoke memory. "Oh no," I groaned. "Not total eclipse of the heart. Anything but that." "You were drunk," she said. "I was sober." "That's worse." And then the bond deepened. I felt her thoughts as if they were my own. The palace walls, the weight of expectation, the loneliness that wore a crown and slept beside her every night. I felt the way she'd watched me, how she'd noticed the way I talked to the plasma orchids, the way I bowed wrong but smiled right, how I laughed with my entire face like I wasn't trying to hide anything. Her voice echoed in my head. "He sees me, even when I don't." The neural stabilizer exploded, not literally, just in the metaphorical, catastrophic way that it triggered a palace-wide emotional lockdown and summoned a dozen advisory drones who immediately diagnosed us as entangled. Entanglement, in Zalvioran terms, was a state of psychic resonance that meant two minds had begun syncing at a subconscious level. Romantic? Maybe. Dangerous? Definitely. Especially when one of the minds belonged to royalty and the other belonged to a Terran who once tried to microwave a cup of noodles in a titanium mug. The Council of Emotional Purity convened an emergency session. I was escorted there by Blorb, the jelly-like ambassador's assistant who had taken it upon himself to become my unofficial life coach. He offered advice as he wobbled beside me. "Try not to cry. Not planning to. And don't fall in love with her in the middle of the hearing. Very inconvenient." Too late. The council chamber looked like a glass cathedral suspended inside a nebula. Each elder sat on a floating dais, their bodies translucent with age and wisdom. They communicated through layered harmonic tones that the translator rendered as interpretive dance and passive-aggressive haikus. "Jonathan Heller of Earth," the lead elder intoned, "you have breached the sovereign mind. You have entangled. You must be severed." Eris stood to my right, perfect, composed, devastatingly silent. I raised a hand. "With all due respect, I didn't mean to entangle. I was just trying not to faint." "This is not about intention," the elder said. "This is about infection." "Oh, come on," I said. "It's not a disease, it's a glitch. A beautiful one." Eris twitched. Her ears, that is. Just once, which meant either agreement or mild indigestion. I was getting better at interpreting. The council debated for hours. Blorb fell asleep. I made shadow puppets against a starbeam. Eris said nothing until the final moment, when the head elder asked her directly, "Do you wish to be severed?" She turned to me. Her gaze was unreadable. My heart did a somersault and then filed a complaint. She began, and the room held its breath. "None wish to postpone." There was a collective gasp. One council member dropped their empathy flute. "You dare delay purification?" "I dare feel uncertain," she said, which is, I believe, what this ritual was meant to reveal. That's when they handed down the alternative, the trial of intentions. Blorb explained it to me over synthetic tea. You must undergo a series of challenges to prove that your intentions are sincere. Emotional transparency, psychological resilience, and most importantly, zero manipulation. "Sounds like dating," I said. "Dating with lava spiders." The first trial involved entering the echo chamber, a room that amplified your inner monologue and broadcast it to everyone in the building, including your crush, including the cleaning staff. The moment I stepped in, my voice boomed across the chamber. "Okay, deep breath. You got this. She probably doesn't think you're an idiot. She just has a really stoic face and symmetrical features and majestic ears. My God, those ears." I heard Eris sigh outside. Trial 2, the Hall of Doubt. A labyrinth of shifting walls that turned your insecurities into holographic projections. Mine included my middle school gym teacher, a mirror that only showed bad haircuts, and an AI replica of my ex-girlfriend shouting, "You always joke when things get real." I laughed, then cried, then accidentally kissed a memory wall shaped like Eris. She never brought that up. Trial 3, the empathy gauntlet. I had to relive her pain, not watch it, feel it. I staggered out an hour later, clutching my chest. "She's been alone her whole life," I muttered, "and she never complained. She never asked to be seen." The final trial was a choice: walk away and be cleared of all charges, or step onto the bridge of admission and speak my truth in front of her. I stepped onto it. The floor lit up beneath me. "I don't know what this is," I said, "but I know it's real. I know it's messy and terrifying, and it feels like I've accidentally plugged my heart into a supernova. But I meant what I said. You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Not because of how you look, though come on, but because of how you hide, and how brave it is to let someone see you anyway." The room was silent. Then Eris stepped forward, 3 ear twitches, and the faintest smile. They gave me a badge. It read, "Human Companion Under Probation," printed in 5 languages, 2 of which were only perceptible during REM sleep. The font pulsed gently with biometric sarcasm. Apparently, this was what you got for surviving a trial of intentions and accidentally emotionally synchronizing with a royal. Diplomatic immunity? Number free snacks? Also number just a laminated tag in a very thorough pamphlet titled, "So You've Entangled with an Alien Princess? What now?" Eris met me in the vestibule of cultural tolerance, which was really just a hallway with awkward chairs and mood-neutral wall art. She looked me up and down, pausing briefly on the badge. "You look ridiculous. You say that like it's new. Is it pulsing?" "It's judging me," I said, quietly. "Good, that means it's working." She started walking, and I followed, careful to stay at the prescribed, non-threatening companion distance of 1.3 meters, as outlined in Appendix C. We passed through 4 security fields, 1 thought scrubber, and a gate guarded by sentient vines trained in passive-aggressive conflict resolution. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, what are we now?" "Entangled." Yes, I got that part. But are we entangled with benefits? Emotionally adjacent? Subtextually codependent? She stopped walking. "We're under observation. That's romantic. And any overt emotional behavior will trigger the monitors." I glanced up. A small orb zipped past my head and chirped ominously. "Define overt." She didn't answer. Instead, she led me into a chamber I hadn't seen before. The Reflection Nexus. It was a massive spherical room filled with floating shards of mirrored glass. Each shard held a different version of the viewer, projected through layers of self-perception, future probability, and psychological defense mechanisms. I saw myself as a hero, a fool, a child, a shadow. One shard just showed me trying to parallel park a hoverbike. "Why are we here?" I asked. "Because entanglement is permanent if not addressed, and because you might be real." "Might?" "Reality here is fluid," she said, "but you keep showing up the same way in every shard. Does that mean I'm consistent or just stubborn?" "Both," she said. A new shard floated in front of me, showing Eris and I standing together, older, laughing, surrounded by unfamiliar stars. I reached out. The shard cracked and vanished. "That was rude," I muttered. "They don't like interference," she said. "Reflections prefer to be unobserved." "Like you." She looked at me. No twitch, no flinch. "I spent my entire life learning to disappear in plain sight." "I noticed," I said. Another shard passed. This one showed her alone, wearing the crown surrounded by advisors, face unreadable. She reached for it, then stopped. "I used to think that was the only future I could allow." "Do you still think that?" "I don't know anymore." Silence. Then my badge beeped and declared, "Suspicious emotional shift detected. Companion advised to deploy deflection humor." "Quick," I said. "Tell me a joke before I get zapped." "I don't know any jokes." "Okay, I'll go first. What do you get when you cross an emotionally repressed alien princess with a human who talks too much? She raised an eyebrow. Galactic scandal, I said. Not funny. Give it time. It's a slow burn. Her lip twitched. The shard beside her flickered, showing her laughing. Then it dissolved. She stepped closer. We're being watched. Monitors? Worse, advisors. A wall slid open. 3 Zalvioran high advisors floated into the chamber, each riding a platform shaped like a judgmental seashell. Their robes shimmered like bureaucratic disapproval. One of them emitted a tone that translated as, "We need to discuss the implications of your continued proximity." Eris stood tall. "He is my companion." "Under probation," the first advisor said. "He has passed the trials." "Technically," the second added. "The council is divided," the third said. "And division invites collapse." I cleared my throat. "I know I'm just a Terran, and probably the least qualified person here, unless one of you's ever gotten dumped in a food court while wearing a Yoda hat. But maybe that's why I matter. I don't want power. I'm not after secrets. I just saw someone beautiful and said it out loud," which triggered a cascade of psychic entanglement, public hysteria, and internal doubt, the first said. "Again, romance," I replied. They floated closer. "The bond cannot be allowed to evolve." "Why not?" "Because it changes her, and change is destabilizing." Eris stepped forward. "Then let me destabilize." The chamber darkened. The shards began to spin. The advisors recoiled. "You've always taught that emotional suppression is strength," she said, "but it's stagnation, and stagnation leads to extinction." "You risk the throne," the second said. "Then maybe the throne needs to evolve," she replied. They conferred in high-speed thought harmonics. My badge short-circuited and started humming Beethoven's Fifth. Finally, the advisors spoke as one. "Your entanglement shall proceed, under observation, under limitation, under review." Eris nodded. I saluted, badly. The advisors vanished. We stood alone. "Well," I said, "that went better than most of my first dates." She exhaled slowly. "This isn't a date." "No?" She turned to me. "It's a revolution." We weren't exactly a power couple, more like a diplomatic liability wrapped in a cosmic misunderstanding with a strong Wi-Fi signal. But somehow we made it work. Under review became under tolerated, then gradually and somewhat begrudgingly upgraded to tentatively accepted by public sentiment, pending monthly evaluations and the occasional mandatory questionnaire about our emotional stability. Our first public appearance was at the Intergalactic Harmony Symposium. We were seated between the Sultan delegation, a species made entirely of telepathic spores, and the representatives from the floating Republic of Snur, who insisted on communicating exclusively through interpretive sneeze. Eris looked regal. I looked like a man trying to remember how to breathe through both lungs at once. "You're sweating," she whispered. "It's my natural state." I thought humans only did that during physical exertion or emotional distress. That's what this is. The speech went surprisingly well. Eris talked about evolution and sovereignty and emotional honesty. I waved once and said, "I used to think vulnerability was a malfunction. Turns out it's a feature." They clapped. Well, most of them. One Snurgan projectile sneezed onto my sleeve. Culturally, that was approval. Probably. After that, our lives became a series of near-normal moments warped by the fact that we were constantly monitored by sentient drones and occasionally used as emotional case studies in galactic ethics lectures. We argued about translation settings, about whether humans or Ilarian larvae had the more absurd mating rituals, about which one of us technically made the first move. "You said I was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen," Eris would remind me. "I was just trying to survive the botanical tour. And then you leaked your entire emotional history into my mind. You call that leaking. I call that radical transparency." She'd sigh, then smile, and her ears would twitch once like punctuation. We explored worlds with magnetic seas and cities built inside sentient clouds. We visited the echo spires, where thoughts turned into visible light, and I accidentally broadcast my inner monologue for 12 hours. It included a running list of her hairstyles and my ranking of them by perceived elegance and cuteness. She pretended not to hear. Her ears betrayed her again. Back on Xalvier Prime, the court eventually decided to stop trying to regulate us. Mostly because every attempt resulted in a public opinion spike in our favor, followed by a wave of commemorative merchandise. I still have a mug that reads, "Entangled and confused, but open to growth." Even Ziri warmed to me. She started annotating our interactions with dry commentary and once defended me during a debate on Terran inadequacy. "He may be emotionally unstable," she said, "but at least he's interesting." Blorb got promoted. Something about initiative and unorthodox diplomacy. He sent us a holographic card that exploded into glitter and a mildly threatening poem. Eventually, we were invited back to the Star Garden. No trials, no advisors, no sneaky surveillance bots humming in the bushes. Just the two of us, standing at the edge of the stardust pool where everything began. I looked at her. "You know," I said, "the first time we were here, I thought I ruined everything." "You did," she said, "and then you unruined it. I never expected any of this. I'm not exactly princely." "I didn't need a prince," she said. "I needed someone real. So, I'm real." "You're painfully real," she said, "in the most inconvenient and necessary way." I smiled. "You know, you still never answered that first question." "What question?" "When I said you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." She looked out over the pond, ears calm, expression unreadable. I turned away because I didn't know how to hold that. "And now?" She turned to face me fully. "Now I do." There were no dramatic musical cues, no sudden interdimensional shifts, just quiet, just her hand finding mine, our fingers tangling like they'd been rehearsing for this moment across 1,000 timelines. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Somewhere overhead, a monitor flickered out of existence, finally convinced we weren't a threat. Somewhere in the palace, an advisor sighed and updated their relationship chart. And somewhere deep inside my once anxious chest, something quiet and stubbornly hopeful finally clicked into place. We stayed there until the stars changed color. And this time, when she turned her back to me, it was only to lead me forward.